Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Pillar.
Welcome. Good to see everyone.
Hi. I was not caught by surprise by that. Not at all. Great to be here. Totally prepared and ready to roll.
Good to see you guys too. Good to see everyone out there. Welcome back, Social Pillar, and hello. It's another week of Social Pillar. We're back, season 2 again, second week in for season 2. This is our ongoing conversation about the value of role-playing games, their crafts, cultures, and communities around the world. My name is Ian Zammit. I am from Roleplay Experience, professional dungeon master, and just general games referee. I'd like to hand over to Thea to introduce herself.
Hi, I am Thea, also known as OMGM. I do a variety of things, running games. I have a stream, but that hasn't happened for a while because life and games. And I just like to, demonstrate some of the things about the difficulty of scheduling and all of that. And I'm fine. Hi. Always love hanging out with these wonderful people talking all things TTRPGs. And I'm okay. Thank you for asking, though. I feel much better. And now I'm going to assume and point that way. And I think it should be... I got it!
Yes. Now that we did it. We're trying. Thanks. Good evening.
We're trying. We're doing our best.
Good evening, good day, and good morning if you're listening to this after the fact. But we are live, and my name is Jared, also known as the GM Chef, also professional DM, incredibly enthusiastic role player, and someone who really likes to tell stories with other people. So thank you, my wonderful co-hosts. But we have a wonderful topic each and every week, and we just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's tuning in. But we're going to crack on with episode 2 of season 2, or episode 12. I don't know how we're going to format that, but codename Operation
Mission Go. Operation Go.
I like the episode 12. Yeah, I think
what are we doing during episode 12? What are we talking about tonight?
All right, that's tonight.
Great question now. Tonight.
Please.
We are going to be talking about. We're actually going to be picking up from what we talked a bit about last week. It's building on. We talked about forever DMing because many of us here are forever DMs. We've played and played and played as games masters very often, and it's nice to be able to have a break so we don't get into burnout. So we're kind of expanding on the burnout model. We were going to talk a bit about the idea of obsession and how you can get obsessed with games and let it take over your life. However, it kind of evolved. We had some discussion over the last, in our preparation for this tonight, and we thought there's something about the perception of what this game is to people outside, the perception that people become obsessed, or we actually had noted down the topic of Satanic Panic, as it had been known in the 80s, as a very big concern for some conservative parts of the world who didn't understand what Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games are like. So we decided to talk a bit about that. Something about the perception of things like Dungeons and Dragons, of role-playing games in general. What is this? What is it to people? The topic we came up with was Satanic Panic Unmasked, debunking role-playing games, obsessions and perceptions. And I'm really keen to hear your stories about this, and you guys, and also the guys in the chat. What do you think about this to start with, to kick off? Jared and Thea.
Who are like, oh, us.
Oh, we have to talk now? Okay, great.
Yeah, we have to talk now. Oh, man, I was not prepared for this. I thought I could just watch. I mean, this is really interesting. So I started playing right at the tail end of that whole idea. That, the idea that we were actually summoning demons or witchcraft, and that it was inspiring people to do crimes and horrible things, and also that people were becoming obsessed with gaming. And I've gone in and out of gaming for a while. Wait a second, I've lost points in my notes. We've gone in and out of that, but I've gone in and out of playing. But I currently am very interested in the way people perceive me as a gamer and as a dungeon master. Is that what we're talking about now?
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
that's a good point. We were kind of looking at the idea of having a look at the perception of what people see what we do. Like, what on earth do we do when we role play games? When you introduce, hi, I'm a games master for Dungeons and Dragons. The reactions we get, the perceptions we get, the interesting responses we get of what people think it is. And looks like Jared's been inspired by something, so he's coming
He
back.
has been inspired. Yes.
And I love it. And that idea of, I think part one, looking at this tonight, is about looking at how people have responded to this, how we've noticed this, what stories we've had about people responding to. I play D&D, I play role-playing games.
Finding out our dark secret.
Yeah, and then some of our anecdotes around that, and we'd love to hear in the chat from, have you had some interesting sort of like interactions with people who are like, oh, okay, you do that. Love to hear this. Particularly, we'll look back at what it was like in the 80s as well, because a couple of us here have been through that experience, and there's some interesting stories. But then part two will come into about what is it really like? What is actually from our experience, the perception, maybe from how we thought it was going to be, and then actually what the reality is, and to kind of debunk those perceptions we've had. I love that you've got the Dungeon Master hat there going on, and I'm going to keep this nearby just in case. Someone gave me this. I did not get this for myself. Just making sure you know.
Of course not.
I have a huge bookmark list of D&D cops that I wanted to get, and then I bought stickers instead and made my own. I literally have the Starbucks logo, but it says Dungeons and Dragons. So I wanted to use a physical prop to sort of
demonstrate it,
enhance the point of, like, could you really go around in public and have people really know what I have on my head? That I mean, to be fair, declaring to the world who and what I am as a dungeon master. For those of you listening,
there is a secondary interpretation of that, but let's not get into that.
Exactly. So
again,
I can. This is the hat that I wear at conventions in context and at game stores in context, but anywhere else. And I think this is why it's we've been talking and kind of floating around the idea that it is a personal thing, because it's not just what is the perception of the hobby, it's also our people's perceptions of us and how that's changed. So
it's actually really interesting. So Hero Zone, welcome to the chat, by the way. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Is an owner of a game store. An excellent owner of a game store, in fact. And someone should give him a shout out because he runs a fantastic stream. But it's just mentioned that owning a game store was sort of almost an expectation that you might get protests. And I think definitely coming from the 80s, there was that perception. There was that idea that there was a societal potential backlash against the game because of what people thought they were doing.
Did you experience it, Thea, at all?
Not back then, I will say. I certainly, I think because I was so young when I started playing and then really wasn't deeply into the game. So I was in primary school when I started. And I think at that point, particularly where I was growing up, people were just pleased that we were reading and could count using the dice.
Yeah.
So that was good. But it's more so in my later life. But I think being at school and being a player, particularly around high school, can be an interesting experience. And I'm not saying you're older than me, Ian, and might have been involved in high school, but
I am.
Do you have a school experience?
Yeah, we've talked about this.
And I mean, I know what
you're
he
leading
does.
to as well. And to share this, and I'm very keen. I'd love to hear if anyone else out there on chat has had any experiences like this. Because it was the Satanic Panic of the 80s was a big thing. It would be good actually if we had some kind of reference to it, so that for any newer generation players of role-playing games can have a look at the past and see how it evolved and in society. Because America really kicked off in the Satanic Panic. It also a bit in the UK, from what I heard, and from the references I've seen. And for those of you who don't know much about it, D&D was a thing. A lot of gamers got into it. A lot of fun playing this, and then some of the more conservative elements of the world started to think, well, you're talking about summoning things and devils, and this is wrong. You can't be doing this kind of thing. And then there were stories about people, of course, the more extreme personalities of people who do anything. They're the stories that get picked up. And there were some sad stories about people with mental health issues who had caused harm to other people or themselves because of
Mm.
this.
Mm.
And that was a whole mental health issue, but it was picked up as being specifically because they had played Dungeons and Dragons. If
Mm.
anyone has had the chance to watch a movie called Mazes and Monsters out there with a very young Tom
Yep.
Hanks,
Oh,
you will
very young Tom
understand
Hanks.
Mm.
it gives a sense of this is what people thought it was kind of like, or it's not everyone. It was some
Mm.
very conservative people who were concerned about what is this because they don't understand it. Now, I didn't
Mm.
have quite the experience that way. I didn't remember it being that conservative in the 80s. I was playing back then around first edition. We had a friend, a few friends of ours in high school, and we played and we used to buy each other gifts of the new box sets that would come out or the new books when they were there. When second edition hit the shelves, we were like lightning bolts straight to the game store to try and be the first to get it there. I remember going to, I think it was Games Paradise or one of the ones in the city, like first thing, so I could get it there. And I was like looking at the player's handbook. It was amazing. Um, but back then, this is it. It was a birthday of one of our mates in about 1990 at the school that I went to. I will not be saying any names to protect the innocent here today. Um,
That's not
we were
us.
there. Funnily enough, I think it was funny you said about before about all of us who played it. We're all in like the top English classes because like this
Mm.
fed our English kind of like imagination as well, which was
Yeah.
amazing. And so the three of us were in there in our homeroom, and we just got our friend a box set for the new thing that came out. He was over the moon, and our teacher was fine with it, but the year coordinator comes in. He has a sit down in front of us. This is like first thing in the morning as well, and he's just, "How you guys doing?" We're like, "Oh, look, we could too. Yeah, okay." And he's like, "Yeah, it's like good to see you. I said your birthday. That's good to know." And well, look, just want to make sure that you know everything's okay. And that you know the things that you do, hobbies that you have that you enjoy, best having them at home and keep them out of school where you can. And we're kind of, what's he getting at? We think
And so,
we know what he's getting at, but
Mm-hmm.
like, okay. He says, like, if I had a motorbike, I wouldn't bring my jacket to school and wear that. And we're like, okay, sure, yeah,
yeah,
we're
Sure.
good.
taking
And
an
after a moment,
interesting path.
we
Yeah.
just kept looking at each other, going,
Mm.
"What is happening? What is he trying to say here?" And then it came to a crux when he finished up by saying, "We just want to make sure you know it's not real, okay?" And we like, "Oh my god."
With the
He's
very concerned, earnest look.
very concerned, and I just all this just came to a head in my head. You're thinking, he's concerned. I get he's concerned, but like, oh my god, what are you talking about? This is a game. It's fun. It's not
Yeah.
devil summoning or
Mm.
anything like this. Whatever you heard, I don't know. He said, "Yes,
Yeah.
sir, completely." And we're trying
Hmm.
not to laugh because we're like, "What are you saying?" Like, but anyway,
Mm.
so he kind of thought he got through to us, and he walked out of there.
You
And
probably
one
felt
of my
very
mates
good. And
felt good. Yeah, he's done his job as well to make
yep.
sure.
Yep.
It's. I must mention we were in a Catholic school that probably had something to do with it. So a
Mm.
bit conservative there, religious overtones.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then one of my mates turned to me at that point and just said, "I was so close to saying yes, oh mighty dungeon master," and then bowing down to him. I said, "Oh, I'm so glad you didn't do it. That
Mm.
we were in worse trouble if you had." But
Yeah.
it was that. It was like, and it wasn't often, but there were little things like that where people took it
Mm.
very seriously that they didn't understand.
That's
I
that
think
very
that's
much believing that, what was it, Monsters and Mazes? The Tom Hanks
Mazes
movie.
and Monsters. Yeah, yeah,
Mazes and
Yeah.
yeah.
Monsters, yeah. That's buying into that, going, that must be, I know that's fiction, but maybe kids do think it's real.
Yeah, because they haven't done
Well,
their own investigation. But
that's the
yeah,
thing is like how
Yeah.
impressionable was that generation, like
Mm.
how much, film wasn't at the caliber that it is today. Everything's
yeah.
sensationalized and enhanced
Yeah.
and next level action, action, action. So yeah,
Mm.
like, horror movies were far more tame. And then when you start to,
Mm.
like if you were sat around the dinner table and your 14 or 15-year-old teenager said, you're like, oh, what did you get up to today? And they start using all of this language of like, we slayed a, fantastical
Yeah.
creature
Oh, we went out and we raided a dungeon,
Yeah,
and
or,
we
you
actually
know,
finally found something.
Oh, and this guy
Yeah.
died, but we managed to raise him
Yeah.
from the dead and blah, blah, blah. And
all of it.
Yeah.
like, and we summoned a
Yeah.
ritual. We did a ritual so we could summon this thing to destroy
Yeah.
the evil
All
that
of
we're
it.
fighting. And you're like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, we called on
Yeah.
an angel and stuff, and it's like, what that, you know?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
all of that sort of stuff. And yeah, and then it's
Yeah.
also quite violent, you know, like most of the rules are because of the
Yeah.
combat. Like, let's be real, that's
Yeah.
resolving
Yeah.
the thing, and it's a core tenet. It's one of the three
Yeah.
pillars. This being the other one.
Where it came from was a
Yeah.
war game.
One of the others.
Yeah.
But that's it, as it comes from wargaming. So, you know, it's already been built from that upwards. And then, of course, I think sort of a sort of step to the side is, again, like with the game stores and how they may not have wanted to have it because of all of that. And then there's, I think that's added one of the layers to the gatekeeping that's been around it for so long. So thank God we've done away with that, as well as the strange, you know, and it was just ignorance. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't anything wrong. They were just trying to protect you. At the end of the day, that teacher was just trying to protect you.
Yeah.
This
it
is
was all
important
from
to
a
know.
good place.
Yeah.
And it was also before the internet. Like, it's so
Exactly.
hard to describe to anyone who's not grown up without the internet. I'm really trying to the understanding that the information just wasn't available. So you got from newspapers that were limited, or maybe the news, or from hearsay. You never got information from many sources. It was usually very limited. So you believed a lot more of stuff that would come through. And usually, like, this is a whole other discussion, media was a little bit more reputable because they had to be, because there were less news sources, another story. But that whole idea that there was less information.
I like how you could see I was like revving up to have a comment on
that. But that whole idea, that there was less information, so there was more refined and more work had to go into it because people believed in it. It was funny, I just realized that Stranger Things in the last season, no spoilers, dealt with the Satanic Panic issue in the show, because it's set in the 80s, which was really interesting. And it was like, yeah, that's the stories that I'd heard. It was nuts. But
it's actually really interesting to me that, like, when you're talking about, it's like, oh, we used to be like that and they used to have those beliefs. I have a story to counter that, because it's from now, and also ties in a bit to something that Purdy was saying about when they tell people they're a dungeon master, they get one of three reactions. But I have several sources of income, which makes it sound like I'm a criminal. But one of those is in a
itinerant.
That's much better. Well, one of those is in a very corporate environment. Like, this is very corporate. There's a boardroom, you know, not everybody wears suits, but you generally will be wearing something that has buttons. I don't know why I characterized it that way. Anyway, but in that environment, I'm very lucky. I work in a very accepting, wonderful team of human beings. So I tell them things that I do. And when I tell them that I'm a role player, that I run Dungeons and Dragons, that I run different things, I'm going to a convention to run a game, it is interesting the way that I'm perceived. And now it's not negative, because it is a wonderful workplace. It's a wonderful team. But the people kind of look at me as almost like a strange little creature. It's like, oh, you do? How interesting. And they're fascinated.
I get that. I've seen that.
Yeah. And that's actually interesting, because I work in this is a conservative area. You're more in the arts area, but still people are like, you're a strange creature that you do this. They think it's great, but it is this kind of foreign, as if it is something that normal people, not that I think there is any such thing, but, you know, it's not something that is mainstream. Whereas I would argue numbers wise, it is quite mainstream.
Getting there.
But yeah, so that's kind of interesting that we talk about, you know, people used to think a certain way. And I think,
yeah. I don't think it's changed too much necessarily. No. Yeah.
I don't think the fear is there. I don't think people are afraid that their children are going to, or adults are going to believe this. But there is still a stigma. There is still a societal belief, I think, at least in the society that I'm in, about it.
A perception, in a way, like almost like not pigeonholing, but like, oh, you're there kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you feel that, Jared, too? It's like
it's like a distance.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Icarus in the chat has also said that. They get the look.
Yeah.
The look.
Like that's the thing is it's strange because I think my journey in a very similar sense is I've worked in mostly hospitality, so you get some types in hospitality, but I've never been like I've worked in proximity and then eventually went into kitchens, so like actually became a chef, and it was
You saying you just
around
hung around till they hired you?
yeah, pretty much. I just kept eating until they were like, "Hey, you know the whole menu
You must
inside and
know
out.
food.
Do you want to just make it yourself?" No.
Nice.
It got to the point where when I was working in delis prior to actually stepping in the kitchen, I would tell people it was board game night because it was just easier
Yep.
for people to conceptualize. So I didn't
Yeah.
I never said I just said I go to a game store and I play a bunch of board games with people. So people
Yeah.
knew I needed to get out by a certain time, and just for that kind of a reason,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
function and just for ease of explanation, because otherwise you can't shut me up if you don't know anything, you will know everything. Give me 5 minutes, I dare you. But I
Your
have
elevator
obviously
pitch.
I have distilled it down into, well, it's a cooperative storytelling experience and there's rules and dice and like you just have a common dialogue that you share, and I say what environment they're in, they say what they do, and then we do have this back and forth, and it's just episodic, and that's as quickly as I can explain it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that does
And
a
I think
pretty
there is
reasonable job, and it demystifies
Yeah.
a lot of it. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think my favorite question to actually ask people now that we're talking about people's perceptions is, oh, well, what do you know of it? Have you seen it on such and such shows? Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, now with the movie, I think it's just pretty much plastered on buses and everything. So it's not like people aren't going to know contextually that it is a fantasy action, Guardians of the Galaxy-esque hijinks thing.
Yeah.
But
And
in the past, it's just been easier to say other things, like just say board games. That's my experience.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting because
I
Birdie's put
identify
in the
with that.
chat works in a school and that gets
Oh,
a
right.
range of reactions
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
this what we're talking about, that kind of othering.
That's so
and-
cool.
yes,
That's
to
fantastic.
my child plays and giving them detail on the characters. And again, I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background. Dean Dog is once again making his presence felt.
Hey, Dan Dog.
Hello.
Dean Dog. But yeah, it's that range of perceptions, I think and I think people are more open, exactly what you guys have been saying. They are more open. And I think the movies and, the different podcasts and streams and series are making it more accessible and easy to explain. I'm thinking, 10 years ago, if I was going to explain, oh, so I play D&D, what's that? I couldn't say it's like the movie or it's like this show. You have to go for the kind of, it's a collaborative storytelling game. Which can have a whole bunch of different ideas in people's heads.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is easy. Sorry, go.
No, that's okay. Sorry, I was jumping in.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I did like what
I've
you
jumped over
said
both of you.
before. What you said, that line of when they ask you, oh, you play this, and you go, yeah, what do you know of it? Because that's a great way to put it back to them to say, well, this is what I've heard. And I love that idea that you can say, well, it is partly that, but also know this. It's like that it's game. We use your imagination a lot. It's a team game, so you all win. And it's because you can do a story over more than one session. It doesn't have to end at the end of a session. That's it. And we use dice to decide things. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
getting some,
oh, okay.
Yeah. Getting some great suggestions from chat. Explaining it as imagine reading a book, but semi-acting with dice and snacks.
I love that.
And
So
sitting down and
much.
writing a script with your friends.
So much.
Yeah. Snacks are important.
Yeah. The pizza grease that's on my first ever 5th edition player manual and in my Curse of Strahd book, like I know that there are massive thumb grease things from Greasy Pizza at the game store. That's memories embedded into the history of our journees.
That familiarity among players I can see as well. That kind of I had to mention this as well. This here, I made this for the group that I've got a while ago. D&D players from 5th edition will recognize this specific reference.
Utterly gorgeous.
And it's like,
that's fantastic.
I just walk through sometimes wearing this outside. And it's like every now and then there'll be someone who goes, oh, and you're like, D&D player, I love it, because they know they get this as well, which is hilarious.
I've not worn this in public enough to get that, but I probably should. Because that would be great.
Yeah, I
Like
like it.
I've been at the lights on my motorcycle and someone's been walking past and they had headphones in, but they were wearing a Critical Role hoodie. And then they had a backpack on. I
Yes.
couldn't
Yeah.
see what was on the back. But I tried to yell
Yeah.
out at him, is it Thursday yet?
Ah.
And didn't quite catch
Right.
him, but you know,
Next time.
I had to give him a good, I had to think quick.
Yeah. But that's interesting. That's kind of tying into what are the actual lived experiences of perception. So
Yeah.
we've talked
Yeah.
a bit about that, and we've talked a bit about kind of outside view. But what are
Mm.
some of the things that are? What are some other experiences that we've had? You know, in
Well, yeah, I
terms of
think that would be
what
nice
is
to
the
talk about
reality of
'cause
engaging? Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
going to
sure.
suggest some more of our anecdotes
Yeah.
because it'd be good to hear again from chat because I'm loving the chat. It's going off, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing
Thanks, everyone.
your experiences. I've had the side eye. I've had the look of the
Mm-hmm.
oh, you play
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons, and it's like,
Yeah.
all right, I know where you are at now. It's like, and there's that kind of
Mm.
sometimes it's like, I know you're a nerd, and it's like, that's like literally, I've had someone say that to me
Yeah.
as well once of like,
Yeah.
oh, so you're a nerd, and I said, and I
Yep.
at that
Mm-hmm.
time was confident enough. So it's only been in the last 5, 10 years at most, probably the last 5 years. I said, "Oh, you're a nerd," and I was like, "Damn straight I am. I'm king of the nerds. Love it."
Oh
And
yeah.
it's like,
Yep.
oh,
Mm.
and it's like shifting that perception of nerd of what that
Mm.
means, as well as like in
1000%.
the last 15 years, has shifted to be like cool and
Mm.
acceptable
Yep.
in a number of
Yeah.
ways. Shows like as much as we can like groan at something like The Big Bang Theory or other
Yeah.
Mm.
shows that have
Mm.
shown
The
D and
IT
D,
crowd,
it did a lot.
etc.
Mm.
IT
Yeah.
Mm.
Crowd, the best
Yeah.
episode. It is
Yeah.
fantastic, and it's like
Yeah.
and Community did a lot
Community.
for
Mm-hmm.
it as well.
Massive.
It's a
Yeah.
very
Massive.
smart show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many things started to bring it out, and it changed the way in Critical Role, of course, on the
Mm.
around the same time. Game of Thrones coming out as the way it did
Mm.
shifted the perception
Huge.
of what fantasy can be.
Yep.
Lord of the
Huge.
Rings
Yep.
did it in 2001 as a general thing, but then it
Mm.
Mm.
shifted, and it's amazing. It's like
Yeah.
we've had such a different understanding of what it can be because it's not just one thing, and it's
Yes.
now starting to shift that. But I think people are more confident in being able to say, "Oh,
Mm.
what is that?" Like
Yeah.
I get more now of people
Mm.
Yeah.
saying,
You get.
"Oh, cool." Yeah, I get
Yeah.
people who
Yeah.
say that. I've
Yep.
not played it, but you can tell they're like,
Yeah.
I
You
want to
get
know
the
more.
inquisitive, and like only Aussies might understand this. You get the inquisitive. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
As
You
in,
get the
tell me
difference,
more.
but
such an Aussie
Translated,
thing.
tell me
yeah.
Yeah.
more. You know, and it's yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, people
Mm.
go,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that. I get, you know, and it might come with an initial sort of tinge of the eye, the look, the opinion that is formed, but it's
Mm.
right. I
Yeah.
I've heard of that more recently than
Yeah.
yonder.
Mm.
Unlike my coworker, however, who bless him, I'll be demonstrating his age. As soon as I said, "Oh, you know, we caught up. What was happening on Anzac Day?" and I said, "Oh, I played about 5 or 6 hours of Dungeons and Dragons." He went, "Oh, the Devil's Game." And I
Yep.
knew that he was like sort of semi-religious,
Devil's
but he grew up in that time. He was
Yeah.
probably, I
And
think, actually
Yep.
maybe in his 20s, I want to say, like
Mm.
teens. So he would have been right there with it. So
Yeah.
Mm.
I think that's really interesting because I'm talking about the changing perception of people when we say, "Hi, I'm a dungeon." I don't say I'm a dungeon master. I say I'm a games master. Um, for some of those other perceptions.
Yeah.
But
Me
it's
too.
when you talk
Yeah.
about that, I think the way people can ask about it is changing. That stigma that I mentioned
Yeah.
before, people aren't as afraid to seem interested. They aren't
Mm.
afraid to go have a positive view. Whereas I
Mhm.
think perhaps just in the sort of areas I was societying in, yes, I'm using that as a verb, that it wasn't cool to be really interested in it, so people weren't
Yeah.
comfortable. And I think there are
Sure.
still groups of people or still people that aren't comfortable to seem interested. But I
Mm.
think it is becoming safer for people to say, oh, actually, that's kind of cool. I am interested in that. And tell me
Yeah,
more. And hey, maybe I can come along to play sometimes.
Yeah.
for sure.
'Cause
That's
I think-
kind of it's a throwback to kind of how mazes and monsters like bring the player characters together. Is they like somebody, it just kind of comes up in conversation, and then it was an odd thing that I observed in that, which was, oh, well, this is my character, And I feel like that's such an old school thing, is like you really had your character, and because maybe games were so sparse, not quite the abundance they are today, at least in my experience, we have opportunities to play so many different characters all the time. So the way they introduce that in that game is these people coming in and they're like, oh no, this is who I have kept with me and who my current character is, and there's not an opportunity to do that, because don't they like come to a school, like Tom Hanks comes to a school and meets an existing group or something like that? Isn't that what happens?
Yeah. Oh, look, it's been a while since I've watched that movie. But
And he's
yeah,
like, they start getting into a group and then it kicks off. But
it goes from there,
I feel like that has almost never happened. That you just kind of go, oh, well, you've got a player, join our group. Like, you know, it's always, I don't know, like, how do people go from not knowing to knowing to wanting to play or to get involved? I feel like that's a whole perception, and I mean, we have kind of touched on that with the new player journey. We actually covered that with Sim in the new player journey. Really,
I think Equist has got a point. Was an interesting question about: do you think the people's perception of what considered nerd culture has been led by media rather than internally driven from the games and the people playing them?
1000%.
I think that is interesting, and I have a view. Yeah. Ian, do you want to go?
You first, because you've got a. Thanks for bringing it up, because I can build on it.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting when we talk about sort of the popular media and the people who are influencing that and who have power to have displayed in media. And so I think that the people who are inside of games, and that's a huge generalization. Some of them are in media and some of them aren't. Some of them have that ability to influence. I think that the nature of how long it takes to get influence in various medias, not the modern media, not streaming, not that sort of stuff, because I think that is a far quicker turnaround. But because it took a while in traditional media to get power to influence, then you tend to have views that are older school. And that my feeling is that tends to be disconnected from the current state of the community around that.
Well said.
A little bit.
There's a lag.
But
there's a lag.
Yeah, there's a lag.
Yeah.
Completely, because Twitch is a whole different medium compared to the television and the film of the past. It's like it's so much more quick to pick up on things. I know for sure, of course, the makers of Big Bang Theory were players when they grew up. Same with Community. What's his name? The guy who wrote Community and does Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon. He, of course, did a supplement for D&D on Rick and Morty specifically. So that's actually building off that. The Russo brothers very much say that they developed a lot of their stuff from stuff that they used to do when they played D&D as they were growing up. And they, let alone so much of their stuff is collaborative shows, which is like Arrested Development, amazing show. Community, again, collaborative. It's all about teamwork. And then they did something like The Avengers. It's completely about groups of people who are very different working together. It's an ensemble. And it's amazing. All of these people who grew up with it are now in places of influence in traditional and now non-traditional media. I think it's starting to head in that direction. So it's, and let alone Critical Role and voice actors and all these people who are doing computer games and are across that, are bringing that forward in such ways so that the current generation, it's just a normal thing. It's like people just get, oh, I haven't played D&D yet. I can't wait to do it. It's like, I would have never heard that 20 years ago, let alone when I was a kid. Showing my age, but
we're all young at heart. But I mean, I'm looking at some of the groups that I sort of hang out with are some of the more, traditionally not nerdy, very high sporting type people, musicians, that sort of stuff. They want to play. They're interested, and are quite open about it and are happy to discuss it. But I think that's the faster media. It's almost like we've got the young media and then you've got traditional media. But I know we've kind of come around a little bit. But I am not as confident saying that I think media lags as I would have been before the rise of streaming services. And I don't mean Netflix, I mean this kind of streaming, where it is more of a genuine connection, more democratized. I feel like I'm getting into lecturing, no? But this is something I really find fascinating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like we've obviously had to deal with both our ability to influence, because I feel like now that, that you guys have been so, we've all either taken on, professional kind of roles in the hobby now. So I feel like, someone it's a bit of a sensational thing to say, but someone on Instagram had said that Dungeon Masters and Game Masters have been basically working for D&D and role-playing games every time that we run the game. And I feel like that's such a locked-in perspective. But that's someone with a big following on Twitch, on Instagram and like around social media. So that opinion is now out there and it's been exposed to a bunch of people, including myself. So yeah, that's now changed my perception massively about how I see myself as a dungeon master who has taken it from many, many years of running the game at no financial benefit, we'll say, to word it correctly, to getting a financial benefit and getting compensation for my time and energy and effort and skill and ability that we eventually attain and reach. And yes, there is absolutely the argument of no, paid DMing is wrong. I would never do it. I've been running the same game for the group of friends for 20 years. Cool. I don't know that you could actually step away to a group of strangers and run a competent game. That's something I've been talking with my local game store owner is, we talked about how he was the first person to ever pay me for role-playing, for dungeon mastering services, and other people who have been there in the store now that it's been open for 5, 6, 7 years. I don't even know how he's seen people come and go, and how there may have been people who were worthy of a similar treatment, but never quite. And I'm not, So it's interesting there. So you have someone who's obviously, financially involved with all of the tabletop hobbies, as well as heavily role-playing games. And game stores don't get a financial benefit massively from role-playing games. One group can buy 3 core rule books, or in the case of some role-playing systems, 1 core rule book, the One Ring, Dune, etc., Shadowrun, generally all one in, Alien Roleplay, any of the Free League games. There's expansions and modules, etc., etc. But everything you need can be in one $100 product, and then they just get to play in your game store. So,
and it's not feasible and practical. Absolutely, I literally spoke to a store owner today about exactly the same thing, that his difficulty in being able to run regular games. And I thought, honestly, charging people for it is exactly what you should do, because you've got a premises. It's like you've got to turn the lights on, and I think it's valuable.
People want a place to play, and that has always traditionally been a game store. It's such a fantastic thing. And I feel like that's the other thing, is it's just never been exposed now, and that's why I love Collecticon, because so many other people who are coming for the broad range of collectibles and not just pop culture, that's all attached to it. And now we have our beautiful section of D&D that people can just walk past, and I get to sit at the admin desk and just talk to people about the hobby. And that's purely in context, so it makes it quite easy.
Did we start this so that you could talk about D&D all day? Is that are we running an entire convention?
Isn't that what I said?
You can talk to people about D&D all day?
That's not what I said. That I
transparency
scoured
that's what we're doing.
The greater Sydney region for 2 of the best and brightest that would join me on this epic journey. I think that's what you mean.
That's definitely what I meant.
But alas, here we are.
I think the value of being able to discuss this, it has shifted, because I get the argument of people saying that it should be a hobby, you shouldn't be charging for it, and this is how it should be. And I'm sorry, I just put on a character then. I don't know why I just did, because sometimes it feels a bit
because it's not your opinion, it's someone else's.
It's not my opinion, but and I've seen it very aggressively posted as well. I'm like,
it does get aggressive.
You do you. You do you, and it's okay. It's like, I love the fact, the whole point of this is for people to be able to enjoy it in their own home with their own friends and enjoy that. It has now evolved, I believe. And this is, I think we're starting to shift now in our discussion of the perception of people who don't play looking at role-playing games. We're starting to look at the idea of what's the perception of the game from gamers. It has shifted. It is not the same. It is not, it's not like the Mandalorians in season 1 who are all in a little thing underground, basically, to take care of themselves and have their way. This is the way. It's not like that anymore, because it has become, and yes, John Favreau, who does that show, has definitely played D&D when he grew up.
Yes.
This is another thing.
I watched his cooking show, and he talks about it. It's so fantastic. I was so shocked.
It's so funny, because it was looked at differently. I knew I was way unconfident about talking about it outside of people. And as soon as I recognized there was somebody who played, I was like,
Yeah.
we can talk. And it was all in whispered tones and things like
that's
this. And
low.
I was in the UK and I had I'd gotten a job as at a workplace that was with my wife at the time.
Yeah.
At the time, my wife.
Or if
Anyway,
your
we
workplace
weren't
at the
married
time.
yet at the time.
Yeah.
We that was working there, and there was a colleague of hers who's a laugh and half. He's a really great guy, and
Yeah.
but then he got some hint from Michelle that oh yeah, Ian he plays Dungeons and Dragons. He's like, really? Do you think would he be interested in playing in our group like this? And it was really this is like
That's cool.
20 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And I was like, and
It
she
was
said,
that
oh,
sort of hushed
I know.
voice.
And my wife is wonderful because she's just laid back about everything, and so she does not need to play D&D or any role-playing game, but she's very happy with it. It's just not her
Yeah.
thing, and that's all good. She's happy
Fair.
to go go to have a spa retreat for a day while I have the guys over for a game or whatever. Anyway, but at this
Relationship
point,
goals.
relationship goals.
Yeah.
Jeez, hashtag. And so at that point, he's like, he said, geez, I'm going to ask her. And she's like, yeah, just go ask him. That's okay. Like, she's really down to earth about it. And he came over to me. I just remember it was like this real, hi, I'm Mike, and this is Ian. Do you play Dungeons and Dragons? I went, yeah, I do. Do you? And he's like, yeah. And it was like, kindred spirits, that moment of, and it was so cool. And it's like, best of mates since then. It's really great. But it was like, you didn't talk about this. And it's like,
bring it up. Yeah.
Which is a whole thing we could talk about here because we're talking about perception. Maybe I'll go into that a bit later. Have you had any
Perception and
experiences like
interaction?
that?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Well, perceptions that can either bring people into the game or can keep people out of the game, because I think that's an important thing as well, is the way that, say, someone who's coming new to the game perceives other players and perceives the group is really going to impact how comfortable they feel telling someone that they play. Like even the example that you just told, Ian, with like, it's almost as if your friend had to get your wife as like an intermediary because that was safe, I don't know if he's going to be accepting. So I want to go through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know, and you see it on a lot of the discussion boards and all of the community boards, people, and it's for players predominantly, because I think when you run games, generally you will find people who want to play.
Oh God, yeah.
But for a lot of players, you hear and see a lot of discussion about, either I don't know how to find a group, or I'm found a group, but they're not really the group for me. It's almost as if there's a reluctance to find a group that fits you. It's almost like
there's an interesting concept which is, and I might have spoken about it before, but like how uncomfortable you are determines like whether or not you're actually benefiting from something. So let's say your destination was 1 mile away, that's perfectly walkable, but you decide in your mind, well, if it was 2 miles, I would cycle or I'd drive. So now you actually get there quicker, so you have more time to do other things because your situation was slightly less convenient. But it wasn't like it has to get to a point where it's either miserable enough or uncomfortable enough, because the greatest addiction in the human condition is comfort, whatever that form is for other people. That's how I like to say it. And I think we'll touch on sort of our hobby and our perception as it took us in healthy directions. I think Ian and I both sort of have something to talk about there, and Theo, I hope, maybe you do as well. But it's strange. It's a strange.
That's actually interesting. So sort of that, and it's something that I think is really interesting. So that perception of what a group is, what a group should be, really influence, like what is acceptable within a group, what should my expectations be?
It's
that
really, what is the culture? You're stepping into not only a little biome or a little, what are those little glass ecosystems called?
Oh, in the bottle sort of things, and the seals?
Super cool. Little terra somethings. That's what a D&D group is, until people talk on the internet or interact with another group and get to a game store and go to a convention and start a live D&D live show and podcast about role-playing games. But that's the thing is like what the culture means to me and to you and to people listening is going to be also different because you're now that you're a part of it, your perception of the community, of your group, the idyllic group. I even said to the game store owner last night while talking to him, I said, well, look, you know, obviously my skill back then when you started paying me and now has grown because I've continued to stick with the hobby. So is it, you know, is it comparable now? Do I charge more? You know, like exactly. So
it's changed.
that's my experience of the hobby is what is my time worth in a strange way? And how much do I play for fun? Because I need it for fun as well.
Yeah.
It is my fun thing. It's such an important thing to me. But at the same time I have to recognize my skill and ability and when it's applicable. Yeah.
That's a valuable thing though to know. I think it started to the actual activity of role-playing games, of tabletop role-playing, of groups of people coming together is starting to be seen for the not even therapeutic benefits, because that is definitely part of it, literally team building, that it's now being seen, and this is part of the professional development of games mastering, refereeing just in general of tabletop role-playing games, is being seen as there are skill sets here. There are very, very important skill sets in being able to develop groups of people as teams, because it allows empathy, it allows imagination, it allows looking into problem solving outside the box, particularly because you look at things literally from a different perspective, but it can still be applied to how, you know, literally the ability to talk to people and listen to people who are different to you and actually working it. We have to work this out. The scenario could be because you're about to drown in this trap-filled like ruins of something that's been set up so you can try and get this treasure while you're being attacked by other creatures, whatever. Not realistic, you know, in life in the sense of what we deal with day to day.
One hopes not, anyway.
You really hope not. But the idea of people getting to understand we have different skill sets. I know that you know how to hold that off while we actually work together to do this here, and then someone's protecting us. That ability to communicate is something humanity needs. It's like being able to work in teams to become better at communicating with each other and listening to each other, because people learn differently and people see the world differently. I didn't realize just how much things had changed in terms of, and I didn't realize my own bias and own perspective in role playing games until my wife's cousin is one of my best. It's the group that I play with now. It's the best group that I work with. And she is, because like from Indian background, and she has some friends, Filipino, white Australian, you name it, mix of people as well, male, female, you name it. I grew up with all guy, white kind of like groups. You know, the archetypical thing, E.T., Spielberg. E.T. has D&D in it, and it's like a whole group of guys who are in teens, like young teens sort of thing anyway.
Yeah.
I grew up in exactly that. And then eventually I did have my sister played in a game, and then my girlfriend earlier on, and then other people slowly but surely. One of my best mates when I was growing up was Singaporean background. And that really, what's the word? Modeling, me seeing it happen was huge for me to just say, yeah, I get this. So when lately, like D&D released something called Tales of the Radiant Citadel recently, and there was some people, particularly people of color, who were lauding this, saying, thank God it's actually written by all people of color to have that representation. And I was like, for me, I was like, this is awesome. I love this because I don't get to see that perspective. This is a bit different. Great. Didn't even think about it. Then I saw some of the posts that were coming back from it, from people who were going, why do we need this? The representation's here. It's like, we don't need to hear about this. It's like, you know, it's like D&D is acceptable of all things. Why do you need to make a deal of this? And I thought, that's easy for someone to say when white people is everything you see every time you look at a fantasy game. And it's like, we need more of it. It's seeing people on screen.
And it's when the representation is done by people who are of that background or of that group, as opposed to representation. What was the name of that module that is incredibly racist?
Oh,
Oh,
There was a
mean,
source
yeah,
book in the first edition called
yeah,
Oriental Adventures, and
yeah.
oh
I
my
won't even
God.
get started on it.
Nah,
It's like
Enough
don't
said.
search it.
so many trigger points.
Yeah.
Enough
Yeah,
But
said.
that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's this whole idea, and I know it comes out of the sort of the disabled type community, nothing about us without us, which I think is
yeah,
hugely powerful.
Mm,
But it's
yeah. It's a great
incredibly
term.
true that often, and I mean, I'm, white middle-aged lady. I'm got a hell of a lot of privilege, which I'm very aware of. But even then, being female and female identifying, female presenting, it's still not the majority in the role playing communities that I've associated with. I've gone
Mhm.
in, and I'm also lucky because I run games, because that
Yeah.
gives you an in and a bit of power, because
Yes.
people
mm,
need you.
Yes.
You,
Yep.
if you mistreat the dungeon master, they're gonna walk.
yep.
Mhm.
Hopefully
Yeah.
they have the confidence to walk. But it is interesting when you talk about that representation and the experience of the
Yeah.
community. I think it is improving, but I think there is still a long way to
Yeah.
go. And I think
Yeah.
some people's
Absolutely.
perceptions can be that it is more negative than the group that they might be able to find. If that makes sense.
We're in the first generation of this. It's like
Mm,
this is the toughest time because we're the ones who are
mm,
coming from where it was to where we
mm.
want it to be. Current generation, the younger generation right now are so much more
The
open
younger
to
generation.
diversity. To
Mm,
well, definitely younger than me at least. This is for sure. But the whole idea, 21st century, anyone born in the 21st century is basically
mm,
understanding of diverse cultures, of LGBTI status, of people
mm,
with disability, um, representation across the board of different
mm.
faith being able to work together,
Yeah.
and
Mm,
just looking in this in finding ways to engage
Mm,
people and see it represented and hear their stories
mm.
is wonderful, because this whole
Yeah.
game is about how do
Yeah.
you engage in this
About
weird
stories.
problem, strange here, and it's like stories. It's
Yeah.
all about stories, and who doesn't
Mm,
love a story they've never heard before that has
yeah.
stakes? It's like, and
mm,
Yeah.
we're saying this is three white people here as
Yeah.
well who are a little older, so it's like very, very aware that we've gone
Mm.
mm,
very limited
Yes.
in our
Yeah.
scope as
Our
well.
experience
Yeah,
is, bounded and, pretty privileged. I'm happy to say I've got lots of privilege.
mm.
White lady.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the
Uh,
same time,
uh,
I do my best to understand and to
yeah,
listen.
yeah. Just allowing it into your environment, your space, and your
Mm.
perception of things. Like, yeah, we, in where we live, you can go outside and meet all kinds of people, and it's wonderful and amazing. I've come from, again, a white mixed sort of background.
Mm.
I have a New Zealander
mm,
father and South African mother. I was born overseas in South Africa, but raised in Sydney. So, uh, having born and being in proximity to a country like South Africa that's incredibly unstable and has had
Mm.
straight up some of the more horrible racism and all sorts of political shenanigans, to a relatively, I'm very just let's just say I'm just grateful for the raising that I had, that my parents had the foresight to do that, and that has also given me the ability to network with such wonderful people as yourselves, and started live show. I'm just going to keep trying to bring it back to
Our
bring it
live
back
show
to that,
and how
but
wonderful we are. What have you
no.
done that you were being so complimentary?
No, um,
you're building
but
up to something, I can tell.
not
Mm.
at all, not at all. But yeah, like we've said, is like our ability to interact with it and stuff. And
Mm.
Ian, I think you mentioned in our notes that you might have had a like a role play, like a video game obsession at some point as well.
Yeah, I think that's good because we can probably wrap up on this for now as well. Because
Yeah,
I'll
Mm.
pass over to you because you've got your own experience.
yeah,
Well, for me, it was very simple because it's funny because it was not role playing, tabletop role playing itself.
yeah.
It was actually through
Yeah.
role playing computer game,
Mm.
Diablo 2. It was huge. It was
Yeah.
huge in
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of the turn of the century. It was turn of the millennium. It was massive. And I was obsessed with it. I was still role playing as well tabletop outside of this, and that was
Mm-hmm.
great. But I know that this particular game was taking over my life. I had other commitments, and it was starting to really. I don't know why. It was so addictive. It was just
Mm-hmm.
I would spend every hour I possibly could. And I've heard stories of like 13-year-olds who stay up all night and can't, fall asleep in class because they're doing that same thing. I was a lot older than 13 at the time. And so I remember there was literally a point I got to when I just became aware of it. It was affecting my
Yeah.
life, my relationships,
Mhm.
etc. I had to pick up the CD-ROM you had, took a video of it because I thought this is important, and said, this is ruining my life. As much as it was fun, it's done. And I had to break it
Mm.
and just went, it's the
Yeah.
obsession side of things.
Mm.
Best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
I actually then about 10, 15 years later, bought it again to see,
Yeah.
okay, and
Yeah.
with help by talking to friends first and my
Yeah.
wife
Yeah.
as well to go,
Getting
Yeah.
support.
I
Yep.
want to try this, but I want to see how it is, and didn't get into it.
Mm.
And I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh God.
It was with an
It's
age.
your yeah.
I think.
I mean, I could dive into like addiction and like I've actually given a talk on
Yeah.
its nuances, and it's been in particular video game addiction, and actually how D&D was such a beautiful replacement for that. It had a lot of the similar things, why we're addicted and stuff. We can get into that as a thing if we
I think
wanted
that's
to.
a whole
But
separate
Yeah.
I mean,
thing.
we're
I
just
think that is a
tacking this on the end. I
Yeah.
feel because it just
Yeah.
contributes to the obsession side of things that we touched on with burnout, and now we're obviously talking about the perception of things. But it's exactly that as well,
Yeah.
as like your perception can be all consuming. You can get drowned in it, and that's the
You
last
can
thing we
perceive
want.
that this is the only thing that's important
Exactly.
to you, right?
That's yeah, and
If
we
this
touched
is
on
where
that
you
at the
get value
beginning.
from.
Yeah, we touched on that at the beginning where people did get, if you're in a mentally not sound way, you can let this really really influence you into tragic consequences. But that is the old perception. That is not the culture
Yeah.
now. We have moved on. We're moving onwards and upwards. The official publications are recognizing all of these things when they make little missteps, like with Spelljammer, they quickly unpublished a bunch of images and stuff and rejigged a race online. They couldn't fix it once they published it, but they're trying, and that's the main thing is
They
people are actually
responded.
thinking about it and
They
including
responded.
them. Yeah, and
I
they
think
are listening.
well,
Yeah.
I'd actually put a caveat on that,
Agreed.
a slight disagreement. I
Mm-hmm.
think there is a will in there is a growing will in people in positions of influence and within the community to do better, to listen, to change.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I would say that there is still a really, really long way to go for
I
people to feel
completely
comfortable
agree.
and feel accepted. Yeah.
I
And for
completely agree.
potential
I think it's
solutions.
because it is the first real generation of accountability. In the
Mm-hmm.
last 15 years, we're talking beyond this
Mm.
wonderful hobby of ours, right? This is what we do, this activity worldwide. I mean, Me Too movement is one thing, and then just representation in general is another thing. Over the last 15 years, there have been so many movements of just accountability across the board, and people are starting to say, yeah, colonialism doesn't, it sucks. It does not work.
Bad.
And we're tired.
No good.
We're tired of that representation and thinking that dominates how people are perceived. New ways of seeing the world. Just this is kind of going aside, but just saying about the effects of the film Black Panther and the idea of a wonderfully abundant, powerful African state that everyone is just like, yes, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
is not the perceiving way of things that people had looked at Africa for
No.
over 150 years. And thank
How white
God for
society
that
in
film.
general had looked at Africa.
Yes.
Western society
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
dominated, and throw it out. I can't wait to throw out that kind of thinking and just start to look at people as we're all powerful. We are all able to create amazing things, and if we work together, it's even better. So having that representation is, we're just at the baby steps. You're absolutely right. And just looking at some of the extreme responses when things like this happen, kind of proves it. We've got a way to go.
We have got a way to go. But I am not completely cynical. We are seeing changes in perceptions and seeing changes in the expectations that people have of what this game is and what it should be and what the people who play it are like.
Yeah.
I'm loving this conversation, but I'm also cognizant that we could go down a lot of rabbit holes.
As we do. So
As we
I think
do,
we
as
are.
we
We're at
do.
time.
Um,
So we're is it a time to wrap up? I think
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like I've touched on so many cool things tonight's sort of discussion, and I'll be honest with the chat, it went a little bit off from what we thought it might, but that's gaming, right? That's when you bring a whole bunch of creative, passionate people together. So I'm loving that we went in these kind of start touching on philosophy, and you guys make me think too much. Thursday.
No,
Don't puke
it's
on
not
Thursday.
a
No.
bad thing.
No.
Let's not apologize.
We need to expand the conversation just a little bit beyond like the actual hobby, because it is we're just talking about culture, and we're talking about the human experience, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, all of the things that intermingle with role playing games. I feel like, there's so much content out there about content. There's there's homebrew this, talking about that.
Yep.
There's stuff that's already out there, but we just want to expand that conversation into, I guess, role playing games as a lifestyle. Like, I feel like that sounds cheesy and on the nose, but it is, because we have just talked about work life balance. We've just talked about how we perceive it from outside, then being part of it, and now reflecting and becoming like we become privileged with the opportunity to expand the knowledge of the hobby, and make sure that people do get the right perception at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think
And growing perception, growing the multiplicity of perceptions. It doesn't have to be one thing. I really like some of the comments in the chat, guys.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank you,
It's not
everyone in
about
chat.
one way of doing things.
Yep.
I also don't want it to be over. Thank you, guys. But we do have to wrap it up soon.
Purdy has just made an excellent comment. It's almost like they were reading my mind. It's a facet. Gaming isn't just a hobby. It's a facet and a representation of the society and your beliefs and your values.
Love it.
So it's right that we sort of talk about that, and it's right that we think about it. I think we should.
Yeah.
Also, we can just play out and go out and kill living robots. That's also
And what are we talking about next week, guys? We have a guest
speaking
on that note. On that note as well. We are going to wrap up for next week.
Ian.
Jared, can you introduce? Exactly. Because
there was a really good segue in something that you said. Sorry, Ian, I'm just talking over you. You're not going to be here.
No, go
Quiet.
ahead.
My turn now. Spotlight on me. You've already left.
So what are we doing next week? What are we doing next week? Yeah.
But I was going to say, we had a really good segue in something that someone said, and I've lost it. Next week.
Next week.
But I'd like to get I'm going to sound a lot like Ian, and I'm going to come from that screen. So when I tell you what we're doing next week. So
Yes.
No, you've got to talk, and I'm lip syncing.
You
That's
talk.
what we're doing.
And we mime.
Hello.
We mime.
I am Ian, and next week we actually welcome. Thank you guys for this week. First of all, it's been awesome. The chat has been amazing. This discussion's been awesome, and I never want to ever. It's like Billy Connolly comedy. If you've ever seen it, he says like you go off on tangents, but you'll always come back to something because it's fun. Next week, I sadly will not be able to be on the call with you guys here and with you guys on Twitch, but I will hopefully have a chance to watch. And what we'll be doing is, Jared, Thea, will be working with a friend of Jared's. Do you want to do the introduction, Jared? Do you want to go through the notes there? Or because it is a special date as well.
It's going to be May the 4th, so I'm inviting someone who I know has the Force, because it's Star Wars Day. So while our hobby is not purely Star Wars or fantasy, space, opera, epic adventure, I feel like we could touch on a lot of lore, because I have a very special friend of mine who I've known for a very long time, who I wish I had played D&D with in high school. But yes, my friend Tashara is joining us. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of different wonderful cultures and lore of different things like Star Wars, and give it a nod, I guess, on Star Wars Day, and how we can relate that to storytelling, I guess, is the goal.
I think it's also really important because we talk a lot about D&D, but it's not the only TTRPG system.
No.
And, things like the Star Wars games, I think that it's really important that we give them the prominence, because they're great systems. So I'm really looking forward to next week.
Yeah, we came together specifically because we said we don't want to just talk about D&D. We want to talk about other games. I'm particularly bummed I can't be here next week because I've run the latest version of the Star Wars RPG. And I'm very keen to talk about it. I've had a few sessions where I ran it, and it was a lot of fun. But I will sit back outside and talk to you about it later as well. Can't wait.
Another time.
Maybe we'll do an episode.
Absolutely.
Chat about it. I'd love to see more chat where we actually look at those other. That's what we should look at, is have some other gaming systems and talk about those and the mechanics. So it doesn't always have to be philosophy.
True.
So
Cool.
Purdy
Looking
says
forward
he
to
wants
that next
into
week.
footnotes.
I will. I'll sort footnotes. Thank you. I
Please,
will do.
that'd be dope.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we're going to catch us up on YouTube, of course, because we're going to. We've got all of those starting to head into YouTube now, which is fantastic. Have a look at our socials as they come through each week. We're starting to build on those. You may find some interesting things on there.
Yes. Bye for
I
now.
love you.
All
Love
the
you
best,
all.
guys. I can't wait. I can't
Thank
wait
you
to see
so
how it
much.
looks next week.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank
we'll
you.
see you
I'll
soon.
see you guys real soon. Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.